The sunlight streams through the kitchen window, casting a golden hue across the worn but polished wooden table. Clarence Morrison, 91, sits in his chair, back straight despite the years weighing upon it. His weathered hands, marked with the calluses of a lifetime of honest work, methodically tie the laces of his walking shoes. The movements are slower than they once were, but they carry the same deliberate purpose they always have. The clock on the wall reads 6:15 a.m. It's the same time Clarence has started his day for the past 63 years. Same routine, same purpose, same quiet determination. People always want to know the secret, Clarence says, a gentle smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. They ask me what miracle pill I take or what fancy exercise I do, but there's no secret. Just showing up every day, just doing the small things right. As Clarence rises from his chair, we're struck not by how quickly he moves, because he doesn't, but by how confidently. Each motion practiced thousands of times, each step part of a journey that began long before most people watching this video were born. While most measure wealth in dollars, Clarence's greatest investment was never in his bank account. It was in the legacy he built day by day, choice by choice. Today, we'll walk with Clarence through the story of his life. Not because it's extraordinary in its adventures, but because it's extraordinary in its consistency. In a world obsessed with quick fixes and overnight success, Clarence Morrison represents something increasingly rare: the power of small daily choices compounded over decades. My father used to say, "There are two ways to build something that lasts," Clarence says, as he reaches for his light jacket. You can make it big and flashy, and it might impress people for a while. Or you can make it steady and true, and it'll still be standing when the flashy things have all fallen apart. At 91, Clarence still lives independently in the modest 3-bedroom ranch house he purchased in 1958. He still drives, though only during daylight hours and to familiar places. He still manages his own finances, prepares most of his own meals, and walks 2 miles every morning, regardless of weather. And while his contemporaries have fallen to illness, dependency, or financial insecurity, Clarence stands as a testament to a different path. One marked not by luck or privilege, but by small, intentional choices made consistently over a lifetime. As we follow him through his morning walk, the story of those choices begins to unfold. The year is 1953, and a young Clarence Morrison has just completed his apprenticeship as an electrician. At 23, he's eager to make his mark on the world, but unlike many of his friends, he's not rushing to spend his first real paychecks on flashy suits or Friday night drinks. Instead, young Clarence walks into the First National Bank and opens 2 accounts, a checking account for living expenses and a savings account that he vows never to touch except in true emergencies. "I put 10% of every paycheck into savings," today's Clarence recalls as he carefully navigates a curb. "It wasn't much at first, $5 here, $8 there, but I never missed a week. Not when I got married, not when we had our first child, not even during the layoffs of 75. This simple habit, setting aside a portion of income no matter how small, formed the foundation of Clarence's financial life. When friends questioned why he wasn't living it up more, he had a simple answer: "I'm buying freedom, a little bit each week." His morning walk takes him past Oakwood Elementary, where a crossing guard waves to him by name. They exchange pleasantries about the weather, continuing a conversation that has spanned 15 years. "I started volunteering here after Mildred passed," Clarence explains, referring to his wife of 54 years, who died of cancer in 2008. 3 hours every Tuesday and Thursday, helping kids with their reading. It gave me somewhere to be, something useful to do with my grief. This represents another of Clarence's core habits: social connection with purpose. Throughout his life, he's made a conscious effort to be part of something larger than himself. His church, the neighborhood association, the local historical society, and now the elementary school. People think loneliness is just something that happens to you when you get old, he says. But connection is like a muscle. If you don't exercise it regularly, it atrophies. I've seen too many folks wait until retirement to try making friends, and by then, they've forgotten how. As we continue our walk, Clarence points out landmarks in the neighborhood, not tourist attractions, but personal waypoints in his journey through life. The park where he taught his children to ride bikes. The community center where he and Mildred took dancing lessons every Wednesday for 30 years. The local diner where he still meets his remaining friends for breakfast every Saturday. Routine gets a bad reputation, he muses. People think it's boring, but routine isn't the enemy of joy. It's the foundation of it. When the basic things in life have a rhythm, you have the security to embrace the unexpected moments that bring real happiness. Back at home, Clarence washes his breakfast dishes immediately after using them, another small habit that speaks to his larger philosophy. My father grew up during the Depression, he explains, carefully drying a bowl. He taught me that taking care of what you have is the first step to building what you want. Small messes become big problems if you let them pile up. That's true of dirty dishes, and it's true of finances. This principle guided Clarence's approach to home ownership. When he and Mildred purchased their house, they chose one well within their means, rather than stretching for something more impressive. The bank approved us for much more, he recalls. But I'd seen what happened to families who became house poor, all their money tied up in a home they could barely afford to maintain. We chose a house that left room in our budget for saving, for experiences, for breathing. They also made an unconventional decision for their era. They opted for a 15-year mortgage instead of the standard 30-year. It meant higher monthly payments, yes, but we lived with less for those 15 years, so we could live with more for all the years after. By the time I was 38, we owned our home outright. No mortgage payment meant we could increase our savings rate and still have more disposable income. When he needed a car, he bought reliable used vehicles and drove them until repairs became more costly than replacement. When his children needed college education, he had already been saving small amounts in dedicated accounts since their birth. People often spend money they don't have to buy things they don't need to impress people they don't even like, Clarence says with a chuckle. I decided early on that I'd rather have peace of mind than the momentary thrill of a new purchase. But Clarence's story isn't one of miserly deprivation. Rather, it's about intentional allocation of resources, both financial and emotional. Mildred and I traveled to all 50 states before she passed, he says proudly, pointing to a map on the wall with pins marking their journeys. We saw our grandchildren graduate. We helped our daughter start her small business. We gave to causes we believed in. We just did it all without debt, without financial stress hanging over us. As Clarence prepares a simple lunch, a sandwich with homemade soup he batch cooked and froze in individual portions, another aspect of his routine becomes apparent: his relationship with food. My mother taught me to cook when I was 10 years old, he explains. Basic things at first: eggs, simple soups, sandwiches. But by the time I left home, I could prepare enough dishes to feed myself well. This skill served him throughout his life. Even during his busiest working years, Clarence rarely ate at restaurants or relied on processed convenience foods. Instead, he and Mildred prepared meals at home, often cooking in batches on Sundays to ensure healthy options throughout the week. It saved us money, certainly, Clarence acknowledges, but more importantly, it gave us control over what we put in our bodies. Nothing fancy, just simple, whole foods prepared with basic techniques. His dietary philosophy mirrors his financial one: moderation, consistency, and the occasional planned indulgence, rather than impulsive excess. I've never been on a diet, he says with obvious pride. Never needed to be. When eating well is your baseline, you don't need to correct course with extreme measures. After lunch, Clarence drives to the local credit union, where he's banked for the past 40 years. The tellers greet him by name, and the branch manager steps out of her office to say hello. "Mr. Morrison is our model client," she tells us with evident admiration. "Consistent saver, careful planner, always thinking 3 steps ahead." Today's visit concerns Clarence's required minimum distribution from his IRA, another example of his forward-thinking approach. Rather than waiting until the last minute like many retirees, he plans these withdrawals carefully at the beginning of each year. "Financial surprises are rarely good surprises," he explains. "I like knowing exactly what's coming in and going out. Makes adjustments easier when they're necessary." This methodical approach has characterized Clarence's entire financial journey. In his early 30s, when many of his peers were still focused solely on their next paycheck, he was already working with a financial advisor to establish a diversified retirement strategy. "I didn't have much to invest at first," he admits. "But Jim, that was my first advisor. He told me something I never forgot. He said, 'Time in the market beats timing the market.' So I started small, putting a little bit into my company's pension plan, then adding an IRA when those became available. While friends chased hot stock tips or tried to time market movements, Clarence quietly built wealth through consistent contributions and the power of compound interest. I've lived through 14 recessions," he notes. "The folks who panicked, who pulled their money out when things looked bad, they're the ones who never recovered. I just kept putting money in, month after month, year after year." This patience extended to major life decisions as well. When Clarence and Mildred decided to have children, they first ensured they had adequate emergency savings and proper insurance coverage. "We bought term life insurance when we were young and healthy, so the premiums were low," he explains. "Enough to replace income if something happened to either of us. Not the whole life policies the agents pushed. We did the math and realized we could invest the difference ourselves and come out ahead." As we drive back to his home, Clarence points out several houses in the neighborhood. The Wilsons there, lovely couple, but they refinanced their home 3 times to pay for vacations and a boat. Now they're in their 80s with a mortgage they can't afford on Social Security alone. He gestures to another home. The Harrises waited until they were in their 60s to start thinking about retirement. By then, health issues had forced early retirement, and they didn't have enough saved. Their children are supporting them now. These cautionary tales aren't shared with judgment, but with genuine sadness. It's not that they were bad people, or even irresponsible in most ways, Clarence says quietly. They just didn't understand the power of small habits compounded over time. Back at home, Clarence settles into a comfortable chair with a photo album. Inside are pictures spanning nearly a century, from his own childhood during the Great Depression to recent photos of great-grandchildren. "This right here," he says, pointing to a photo of himself at age 30, standing in front of a modest home with a pregnant Mildred. "This was when we made one of our most important decisions. The decision wasn't about the house or the baby on the way, but about something less visible, creating a will and establishing guardianship plans for their children. Most of our friends thought we were being morbid," he recalls. "We were young and healthy. Why think about death? But planning for the worst while hoping for the best has always been my approach." This early attention to estate planning evolved throughout Clarence's life. In his 50s, he and Mildred created a living trust to ensure smooth transfer of assets and avoid probate. In his 60s, they established advanced healthcare directives. In his 70s, after Mildred's diagnosis, they organized their financial documents and had frank discussions with their children about end-of-life wishes. "The greatest gift you can give your family isn't money," Clarence says firmly. "It's clarity. It's knowing they won't have to guess what you wanted or fight each other over details while they're grieving." This consideration for others has been another cornerstone of Clarence's approach to aging. When he turned 75, He voluntarily underwent a driving assessment and limited himself to daytime driving. At 80, he began bringing his oldest daughter to medical appointments, ensuring she understood his health status and medication regimen. Dependency happens to everyone who lives long enough, he acknowledges, without self-pity. The question is whether you plan for it or let it ambush you. I've chosen to face it on my terms. As afternoon turns to evening, we observe another aspect of Clarence's routine, his approach to technology. Unlike many in his generation who resisted digital advances, Clarence made a conscious decision to keep learning. Started with a computer class at the senior center when I was 68, he says, gesturing to a well-maintained laptop on his desk. Wasn't easy at first, all those terms and procedures, but I kept at it, an hour a day, until it started making sense. Now, at 91, he manages his investments online, video chats with family members across the country, orders groceries for delivery during bad weather, and uses streaming services for entertainment. The world keeps changing, he observes. You can fight it and become isolated, or you can adapt enough to stay connected. I chose connection. This adaptability, this willingness to embrace useful change while maintaining core principles, has characterized Clarence's entire approach to aging. I've had friends who refused to use hearing aids because they didn't want to look old, he says with a hint of frustration. So instead, they withdrew from conversations they couldn't hear, became isolated, and aged faster because of it. Pride is expensive. Clarence, by contrast, has embraced the tools and accommodations that allow him to maintain independence. When arthritis made opening jars difficult, he bought simple kitchen gadgets to help. When reading small print became challenging, he switched to large print books and adjusted the font size on his devices. There's no prize for making life harder than it needs to be, he says simply. As evening approaches, we join Clarence for another ritual, his daily call with daughter Margaret. Though she lives just 20 minutes away and visits twice weekly, they speak briefly each evening, a check-in that provides connection for Clarence and peace of mind for Margaret. We started this when her mother passed, Clarence explains. Just a few minutes to share our days. Sometimes it's the only human voice I hear, especially in winter when the walks are shorter. This small habit, a 5-minute phone call, represents something larger in Clarence's philosophy. The understanding that emotional health requires the same consistent attention as physical or financial health. Men of my generation weren't taught to talk about feelings, he admits. But after Mildred died, I realized I had a choice. Learn to express grief or be consumed by it. With characteristic determination, Clarence joined a widower's support group at his church. The first meetings were uncomfortable, but he approached emotional vulnerability with the same discipline he'd applied to saving money or maintaining physical health. I decided to be honest about one feeling each meeting, he recalls. Just one. Didn't have to be profound. Might be anger about something small, or confusion about handling a task Mildred always managed, but I made myself name it out loud. Over time, this practice expanded. Clarence began journaling briefly each evening, just a few sentences about his day, his emotions, things he was grateful for. The habit has continued for 13 years now, filling several simple notebooks with reflections on life after 90. People focus on physical fitness as they age, and that matters, he acknowledges. But emotional fitness determines whether the added years are a blessing or a burden. This emotional resilience has been tested repeatedly throughout Clarence's long life. The death of his younger brother in Vietnam, a period of unemployment during the recession of the mid-1970s, Mildred's cancer diagnosis and the 13 months that followed, the deaths of friends that have accelerated in recent years, leaving his social circle ever smaller. You can't avoid loss if you live long enough, he says quietly. but you can build routines that help you weather it. That's what all these habits have really been about. Not just living long, but living well through whatever comes. As day turns to evening, Clarence moves through his nighttime routine with the same deliberate care that has characterized his entire approach to life. Medications taken with water, teeth brushed thoroughly, a brief stretching routine to ease the stiffness in his joints. Sleep is the foundation, he explains. Always has been. 7 hours minimum, same schedule every day. Without it, nothing else works right. Not your body, not your mind, not your emotions. This respect for rest, for the body's need for recovery, has been another constant in Clarence's longevity strategy. Even during his working years, when colleagues boasted of functioning on 4 or 5 hours of sleep, Clarence prioritized his rest. They'd brag about it like it was something to be proud of, he recalls. Meanwhile, I'd quietly excuse myself from late gatherings or early meetings that would cut into sleep. People thought I was antisocial sometimes, but I knew what my body needed. This self-knowledge, this willingness to honor personal needs rather than conforming to external expectations, has been crucial to Clarence's longevity. Where others pushed themselves to exhaustion to impress bosses or peers, he maintained boundaries. Where friends ignored early health warnings, he addressed small issues before they became large ones. I've never missed an annual physical, he notes with quiet pride. Started at age 40 and continued ever since. Found my high blood pressure early, adjusted diet and added medication. Caught a melanoma when it was still small. Addressed hearing loss with AIDS before it affected my social life. This proactive approach to health reflects Clarence's broader life philosophy. Small interventions early prevent major crises later. As he settles into his comfortable bed, the same one he's used for 20 years, with a newer supportive mattress, Clarence reaches for a framed photograph on his nightstand. It shows a much younger version of himself and Mildred, surrounded by their 3 children. Everything I've done has been for them, he says softly. Not just the money I've saved or the house I'll leave behind. The example of how to live, that's the real inheritance. 3 days later, we join Clarence for a special occasion. A visit from his great-granddaughter Jessica, a college student studying gerontology. She's interviewing him for a class project on successful aging. People in my field talk about you as a unicorn, Grandpa, she tells him as they sit in his tidy living room. Someone in their 90s living independently, cognitively sharp, financially secure, still engaged with life. How did you do it? Clarence considers the question carefully. The same thoughtfulness he's applied to every aspect of his life, evident in his response. No single thing, he finally says. That's what people want to hear. The one secret, the one habit that changes everything. But it's never just one thing. It's 1,000 small choices made consistently over decades. Jessica presses for specifics, and Clarence begins to enumerate the pillars of his longevity. First, financial security. Not wealth, security. Knowing what's coming in, what's going out, having reserves for emergencies. Without that foundation, everything else crumbles under stress. Second, physical movement, daily without fail. Nothing extreme, just regular walking, staying active around the house, giving the body what it needs to keep functioning. Third, purpose beyond yourself. After retirement, too many men I knew defined themselves by what they used to do, rather than finding new ways to contribute. The volunteers, the ones who stayed engaged with community, they're the ones still here. Fourth, relationships that matter. Quality over quantity. Having people who check on you and whom you check on. People you can be honest with about struggles. People who expect you to show up. Fifth, adaptability. Accepting help when you need it. Using technology that makes life easier. Modifying activities as abilities change. Pride is the enemy of longevity. And finally, gratitude. Seeing what you have rather than focusing on what you've lost. Aging means loss, no way around it. But it also means gaining perspective, wisdom, the chance to see how stories end. Jessica takes notes diligently, occasionally glancing up to study her great-grandfather's face. "You make it sound simple," she observes. "Simple, yes." Clarence agrees with a smile. "Easy, no. Simple is not the same as easy." Every one of those habits required daily commitment, often when I didn't feel like it. And there were plenty of failures along the way. Times I made poor financial choices, periods when grief overwhelmed me, days when I couldn't find purpose. "So, what made the difference?" Jessica asks. "Why did you succeed where others struggled?" Clarence considers this for a long moment. "Forgiveness," he finally says. "Self-forgiveness. When I made mistakes, and I made plenty, I didn't let them become reasons to abandon the habits altogether. Missed a day of walking? Start again tomorrow. Made a poor investment? Learn and adjust. The people who don't make it are the ones who let perfection become the enemy of progress." He pauses, a shadow of regret crossing his face. "My biggest failure wasn't financial. It was being too cautious with joy. Mildred wanted to see Europe while we were still young. I kept saying next year until her health made it impossible. That taught me a hard lesson about balancing prudence with living fully in the present." As their conversation continues, what becomes clear is that Clarence's most remarkable quality isn't his discipline or his foresight, impressive though these are. It's his ability to balance seemingly opposing forces, planning for the future while being present in the moment, maintaining routines while remaining adaptable, acknowledging difficulties while focusing on gratitude. "Most people swing to extremes," he observes, "either rigid in their habits to the point of brittleness, or so flexible they have no foundation at all. The trick is finding the middle path, strong routines that can bend without breaking when life throws its inevitable curveballs." Jessica's final question is perhaps the most profound. "Are you afraid of dying, Grandpa?" The question hangs in the air for a moment, the kind of direct inquiry only a loved one could make. Clarence doesn't rush to answer. "I'm not afraid of death itself," he finally says. "I'm at peace with the idea that my time will end. What I fear sometimes is suffering, becoming a burden, losing dignity. That's why I've planned as carefully for the end of life as I did for all the decades leading to it." He gestures toward a folder on his bookshelf, clearly labeled "Final Arrangements." "Everything's in there. Advance directive, funeral preferences, letters for each of you. Not because I'm morbid, but because I want my last act to be one of care for the people I love." Jessica nods, tears forming in her eyes. "That's what wealth really is, isn't it? Not just money, but the ability to care for yourself and others through all life stages." Clarence reaches for her hand, his eyes bright with emotion. "That's exactly it. In the end, wealth isn't what you have. It's what you build into every day you're given." As our time with Clarence draws to a close, we observe him in his garden, another daily habit that has sustained him through decades. Though he can no longer kneel to pull weeds, he's adapted with long-handled tools and raised beds that allow him to continue nurturing living things. "There's something about watching things grow that keeps you connected to the future," he reflects, carefully watering a row of tomato plants. "Even at my age, I plant perennials that won't bloom until next year. That's faith, isn't it? The belief that life continues, that beauty returns, that effort bears fruit, even if you're not there to see it." This perspective, this willingness to invest in futures he may not witness, has characterized Clarence's entire approach to life. From the first small deposits in his savings account to the meticulous estate planning, from teaching his children financial literacy to establishing educational funds for great-grandchildren, He has always operated with an eye toward what comes next. The tragedy of modern life, he muses, is how we've separated generations from each other. Young people don't see what aging looks like up close, so they can't prepare for it. Older folks are isolated from the energy and questions of youth, so they stagnate. His own family has worked consciously to avoid this separation. Sunday dinners bring 4 generations to his table once a month. Grandchildren call regularly for advice on everything from career decisions to relationship challenges. Great-grandchildren visit to learn family recipes or hear stories of relatives long gone. This connection across time, it's the real legacy, Clarence says as he carefully returns his gardening tools to their designated places in the shed. Not what you leave behind, but what you pass along while you're still here. As the sun begins to set, casting long shadows across his well-tended yard, Clarence Morrison takes a moment to simply stand and observe the golden light. At 91, he embodies something rare and precious. A life well lived, not through extraordinary achievement or uncommon luck, but through the quiet power of consistent habits sustained over decades. People often ask if I have regrets, he says, watching a pair of cardinals flit between branches. Of course I do. Things I wish I'd said to Mildred before she passed. Risks I was too cautious to take. But what I don't regret is the foundation I built. The daily habits that carried me through grief and joy, health and illness, wealth and constraint. He turns toward his home, moving with the deliberate care of someone who understands that how you do one thing is how you do everything. Tomorrow morning, I'll wake at 6:15. I'll put on my walking shoes. I'll move through the day with purpose, building the quiet legacy I hope my family carries forward. Not because I'm exceptional, but because that's what humans can do. Build lives worth living, one small habit at a time. Financial takeaway. The most powerful force in personal finance isn't inheritance, market timing, or lucky breaks. It's the compound effect of small, consistent habits maintained over decades. Clarence Morrison didn't just live to 91. He lived well at 91 because of choices he began making in his 20s. Living below your means, investing consistently regardless of market conditions, addressing health issues proactively, and planning for each stage of life. These aren't flashy strategies, but they're proven ones. As financial wellness specialist, Dr. Rebecca Chen notes, "In my 30 years of studying longevity and financial health, the pattern is clear. It's not the big windfalls that secure the future, but the small, intentional choices made day after day, year after year." What's one small daily habit that's shaping your future? Share it in the comments. Your story could inspire someone to start their own quiet legacy today. And if you believe simple choices build powerful lives, like this video and subscribe to Goldprint. Real stories, real lessons, real legacy.